Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MassINC's annual Gateway Cities Leadership Summit, Growing an Inclusive Economy, Part 2. My name is Maeve Duggan, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Acting CEO of MassINC. Thank you all for joining us. Today's event focuses on inclusive procurement, or how to ensure that all businesses can access municipal contracts and participate fully in the building of our communities. Last year, this event focused on supporting entrepreneurs of color as a central strategy to achieve equitable gateway city economies. Today's event builds on that work and marks the release of our latest report, Empowering Cities to Accelerate Equitable Growth. The timing of this issue is paramount. Massachusetts is set to receive nearly $17 billion in federal funding over the next 5 years through the American Rescue Plan Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. A significant share of these funds will flow through our cities and towns, making the processes they have in place to award contracts and distribute money ripe for reexamination. This essential research would not have been possible without our partners at Lawyers for Civil Rights, who diligently assessed the existing legal landscape and worked with us and our partners to reimagine what that could be. I would also like to thank the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts Municipal Association for their insights and contributions to this important work. Last but not least, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to our generous sponsors, Eastern Bank, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, and Mass Development. Your support makes today's conversation possible and helps to fund our Gateway Cities research all year long. Thank you. Now, we have a packed program for you this morning. We start with opening remarks and then a research presentation, followed by a panel discussion and Q&A. We will finish with a legislative update and brief closing remarks. If you have a comment or question, please enter them into the chat or Q&A functions. We will answer as many as possible during the Q&A portion. Finally, please keep in mind that this session is being recorded. Now to the main event. Please join me in welcoming Bob Rivers, Chair and CEO of Eastern Bank, a good friend of MassINC, and most importantly, a tireless advocate for gateway cities. Bob, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Maeve, and thanks so much for that introduction. At Eastern, we greatly appreciate the long partnership that we've enjoyed with MassINC, with whom we have collaborated on a number of research studies and initiatives focused on facilitating greater equity in our gateway cities. Like you and your team, we believe that this important focus is not only critical to helping to drive the increased economic vitality of these underinvested areas throughout the Commonwealth, but the future of growth and competitiveness of Massachusetts overall. Last year's Gateway Cities Leadership Summit focused on equitable infrastructure investment. We're revisiting the topic this year and drilling down on municipal contracting. We're highlighting actionable changes we could take so cities are able to pursue supplier diversity efforts as aggressively as leaders in the private sector. In last year's report, MassINC and the Coalition for an Equitable Economy challenged us to help close racial and ethnic gaps in business ownership by the end of the decade. With the energy for entrepreneurship that people of color have shown throughout the pandemic, we can get there. We're innovating on the capital side, and we need to see the same energy and commitment on public procurement. Public spending is a sizable share of the economy and vital to small businesses in many sectors. ARPA and the infrastructure bill are a major opportunity, particularly when it comes to creating diverse supply chains from the beginning in new sectors like clean energy. But we need to act immediately to ensure this spending is inclusive. As we have witnessed too many times in the past, if we wait to the last minute to deploy ARPA and infrastructure funds and do it with business as usual practices, we know for certain who will be at the back of the line. Many thanks for the opportunity to participate in today's program. Like those in our audience, I'm looking forward to hearing from our impressive lineup of speakers, which include some Eastern colleagues, board members, and our other key partners in this work. And Maeve, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Bob, for those remarks. Commitment to equitable investment on the capital side is a key element in closing persistent racial wealth gaps. Thank you for your leadership at Eastern Bank on this issue. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Ben Forman. Ben not only serves as Research Director at MassINC, but also the Executive Director of the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute. Ben, take it away.
Good morning, and thank you, Maeve. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to share our latest research findings with you. If you could pull those up for us, Alan. Great. So the last few weeks, or last few months, I should say, we've been looking at work all around the country to increase access to municipal contracts for underserved businesses. There's been a flurry of activity in this area. Cities have been supported by the National League of Cities, by Living Cities, Emerald Cities, PolicyLink. Lots of organizations the last 4 or 5 years have been heavily focused on inclusive public contracting, and for good reason. If you take a look at this next slide, we've outlined them. The first is combating inequality. Business ownership is a huge contributor to the racial wealth gap in the United States. We often think of things like home ownership as one of the greatest forces, but small business ownership, if you look at the research, is at least equal or even more important to disparities in wealth. And so if we want to have more equality in our Commonwealth, we've got to think about closing those gaps. Another critically important reason why we want more businesses owned by people of color is because it's a sure way to increase labor productivity. We know that businesses owned by people of color are much more likely to hire people of color. And we know that because of discrimination in our labor markets, there's lots of people of color who are not contributing at their full potential in our workforce. If we want to be able to invest our public dollars well when it comes to ARPA, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're going to need everybody supporting those efforts. And one of the ways we can get more people into the work is to make sure that the work is being done by businesses owned by people of color. Another critical reason why cities are interested in this is because they're tired of having 1 or 2 bidders for public contracts. That's not great for pricing, and it's not great for innovation. Governments need to have lots of contractors to choose from. And the more that people of color are participating in the work, the more choices they'll have, the more efficient public investment will be. And lastly, growing the number of small businesses. As Bob noted, public spending is a significant component of our economy. And for many businesses, it's really crucial that they have that as part of their business activity in order to grow to a sustainable size and scale. So opening up and making that work more accessible to entrepreneurs of color is pretty critical. And that was the topic of our conversation last year. And we started out with this next slide showing that in Massachusetts, the number of businesses formed each year has been falling dramatically, over half, declined by over half over the course of the last decade. There's lots of reasons for that, consolidation of industries, changes in technology, trade. But we know that one component of that decline in small business starts is lower rates of business formation among people of color, and our population has become far more diverse. So that's starting to have a macro level impact. Now, if we had the data for the last few years, we'd see a change in that trend. And one of the reasons why is people of color have been starting businesses at increasingly higher rates. So we're moving in the right direction. But if you look at this next slide, you'll see that hasn't had an impact yet in terms of disparities in business ownership in Massachusetts. White residents are still 3 times more likely than Black residents to own a business, and almost twice as likely as Hispanic residents. So we're doing good on the business formation, but not the surviving and growing to a sustainable size. And a large part of that is because businesses of color still don't have equal access to markets, including public markets. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the federal money that's coming our way. if you look at the next slide here, we've tried to do some math on this. In any given year, Massachusetts municipalities spend about $2 billion in capital investments. This is very back of the envelope math because we're not certain how the federal money is going to be allocated. But if we look at the numbers, municipalities in Massachusetts will get $2 billion directly from ARPA. And if they get about a third of the state's capital spending, which is what they do in an ordinary year from both ARPA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, that's going to be another almost $2 billion from ARPA and over $3 billion from the infrastructure law. So potentially $7 billion, well over 3 times the size of the annual capital expenditure our municipalities are going to be tasked with spending over the next several years. You know, we're looking at roughly a 5-year spend down on these things, but a lot of it from a contracting perspective is going to be heavily front loaded. So the next couple of years are going to be absolutely critical in terms of municipalities being positioned to do all the work that it takes to ensure that there's equitable access to these federal funds that will be flowing through their agencies. If we look on the next slide at the categories of uses that municipalities traditionally deploy dollars, you can see here that really a bulk of the money is on K-12 school facilities, but also a lot in water and sewer. Well over 2/3 of that investment is deployed by municipalities. And we've seen from the ARPA bill, water and sewer infrastructure was an eligible use for local dollars. In the state's first ARPA allocation plan, a bunch of money went into water and sewer, replacing lead service lines, making sure that that infrastructure is protected from climate change. So I think a lot of the spending that we're going to see is going to be in what we talk about in contracting language as horizontal investment rather than vertical in terms of buildings, horizontal roads, sewer, sidewalks, intersections, all of that is public works infrastructure and falls in that category of public contracting law. And so now, with that thought in mind, I'm going to turn it over to our partners at Lawyers for Civil Rights, Iván Espinoza Madrigal, to talk about what this means in terms of how our state's laws currently position municipalities to spend down these dollars equitably.
Thank you very much, Ben. It really is a pleasure to be here this morning with you, with MassINC, and with our wonderful partners at Eastern Bank. Thank you for making this work possible. It is really terrific to be able to have this deeper dive into procurement. So I'm going to pick up where you left off and go into the next slide, actually, so that we can chat a little bit about differences in how the state works here. On the report itself, which is being released today, on page 18, there's an incredibly useful table that outlines how this works, and you'll see it in the slides that come. But the bottom line is that we have a variety of different mechanisms that municipalities are using to be able to increase diversity in procurement and contracting. And so some of this is by subcontracting, like breaking up contracts, large contracts that could be unbundled, so that creates opportunities that are more bite sizes for some of the smaller businesses, which tend to be owned by people of color and immigrants. Some of them involve bid discounts and also set-asides or sheltered markets, which we have recently seen in Boston, for example. Next slide. So I think one of the most important fundamental pieces here when we start talking about options, what can we do to diversify? There are going to be options that fall within what we call race conscious. So you are very much affirmatively looking for remedies that have, thank you, Ben, for dropping the report into the chat, that focus on race, that are specifically focused on minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses, and then race neutral, which are things that don't necessarily explicitly or expressly focus on minority-owned businesses. And so, as I just mentioned, for example, the unbundling of large contracts, right? Like, so breaking that into more bite-sized pieces, that is an example of something that is race neutral, because anybody would be able to compete for that particular smaller contract that just becomes more accessible for some of the minority and women-owned businesses that tend to be smaller. A race-conscious example would be a little bit more like the sheltered programs that I was describing earlier, or more aggressive efforts that specifically have set-asides for minority contractors. And so, as you could see here in this slide, you see image of a disparity study, specifically the city of Boston's disparity study. For race-conscious efforts, for really targeted race-conscious efforts that have teeth, it's really important for the city to be able to document the disparities that exist out in the market. And so you do that through a disparity study. One of the things that we found through the analysis and research behind the report that's being released today is that many cities don't have the resources to produce a disparity study in the same way that the city of Boston did. And one of the recommendations that we will get to at the end of this presentation is that the state should really be thinking about setting aside money for cities to be able to track their data, to be able to produce a disparity study to help shepherd them through more race-conscious strategies and interventions in the procurement arena. More on that later. Next slide. Okay, so here we go a little bit into the complexity surrounding this. And as I mentioned, if you're following the link that Ben just dropped into the chat, one of the most, I think, helpful charts is table, and this comes from that table 3 on page 18, where we are outlining that cities can have different policies, but this is all guided by state general laws governing municipal procurement. And so under the state laws, there are certain provisions that apply for goods and services, which you see in the slide, certain provisions that apply for building construction, other provisions that apply for public works, and yet others that apply for design services. And the slides that we will go through will showcase some of this. This one focuses on goods and services. And here you also see, and we will see it across all of the 4 areas that I just mentioned, goods and services, building construction, public works, and design services. There are tiers within each of those categories. Typically, if a contract is, or an opportunity is less than $10,000, or if it's between $10,000 and $50,000, or if the opportunity is above $50,000. And although there are similarities that we're going to see based on the particular procurement opportunity, in this slide we have goods and services, there are subtle nuances that are important, which we will review here. And so for the sake of simplicity here, we have grouped them around race neutral and race conscious interventions that people can have if we're talking about goods and services at the municipal level based on the tiers that I was just talking about. So for example, for race neutral, right, ensuring that you solicit a wide range of bidders to be able to do the job, especially when we're talking about contracts that are less than $10,000 or between $10,000 and $50,000. It's important to have a very diverse set of businesses weighing in on that. And I saw in the chat the need for transparency, as somebody mentioned, and I think that's so critical here. How are these opportunities being posted? If you are looking for vendors to provide goods and services at the municipal level, how are you advertising that and getting to more diverse vendors? Now, for contracts over 50,000, thinking about what is the criteria for performance, the successful benchmarks that you want to include in that RFP. and making sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, criteria could be included there. But we will see, as we note here, that there are limited shelter market opportunities possible under existing law, which is another recommendation we will go to, which is an expansion of the municipal capacity to engage in shelter market programs is going to be critical for the Commonwealth to authorize as we move forward. Now, looking here at race conscious, again, race conscious really depends on a disparity study. So you see that in the first bullet there, instituting a shelter market program after conducting a disparity study. And again, thinking through RFP criteria that includes DEI principles. Next slide. So I mentioned goods and services before, which is one of the 4 categories that we discussed in the report. Here we're going to talk about the next category, building construction. And this is huge, 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 huge. Because, for example, one of the expenses that most municipalities incur in Massachusetts is simply even just the construction of school buildings, school facilities, which is something very local, right? School control over, municipal control over schools. So school construction projects are huge. And as the data we're releasing today shows, only 1.4% of school buildings went to MBEs. 1.4% of contracts related to school buildings went to MBEs, which is a really, really anemic figure. And so let's look at this slide about building construction. Again, it's tiered based on the size of the opportunity, right? Below 50,000, above 50,000. And we're going through race neutral and race conscious opportunities. The same applies here. We need to make sure that we have a high number of diverse bidders throwing their hat in the ring in order to help diversify the pool, even if we don't have race conscious measures in place, and continuing to think through RFPs that include DEI criteria. And for the race conscious, again, we're talking about opportunities here, particularly for businesses that can be throwing their hat in the ring under 50,000. Bid solicitation is critical, who we're asking, not just going back to repeat players, but also thinking through the RFPs and the DEI criteria. That's going to be critical here. And more remedies could be available if we had a disparity study in place. Next slide. Here, public works, which are the 3rd major category of investments that are done by municipalities. You know, much of this is going to start sounding like a broken record to you, right? Solicitation of bids under 50,000 to help diversify that space. You know, here we see an inherent limitation in the inability to create a sheltered market program under existing law for public works. And this dovetails with what Ben was talking about, the unprecedented infusion of funds that are going to be received by the state, be received at the municipal level. Much of that is going to go into public works and construction. And the fact that we can't create a sheltered market program under existing law is an inherent limitation here. So this is, again, a recommendation that we have in the report is to change the law to allow for sheltered market programs in public works projects. And for race conscious, you know, if we had diversity studies, we would be able to really provide even more robust opportunities for engagement here, set-asides and the like that have more teeth. Next slide. This is the last category of services that we covered that municipalities solicit and that are covered by Massachusetts general laws. It's design services. And here, actually, there is considerable flexibility. So we're dealing with measures that are a lot more lenient, much broader, much more creative, that municipalities can already be thinking about in terms of how they're going about with design services and who they're using for design services. So there is no low bid requirement. It really just provides a lot of discretion, and you could start including minority business enterprise goals in the selection process already. Race conscious, of course, can continue to flow in similar ways that I have described with other programs. Next slide. So cutting to the chase, based on the review of the last few slides and some of the comments that I've made, and I'm being told I'm out of time, these are the recommendations that I want to turn to. We need to expand the existing sheltered market program to include expressly public buildings, public works in the manner that I was describing. We need to really create clear opportunities for municipalities to unbundle large projects and contracts so that those could be bite-sized pieces that are race-neutral interventions for municipalities. Right now, there's too much concern about impermissible bid splitting that is really causing confusion in the landscape, and that could be cleared up. And the last point about creating a grant program to fund disparity studies and data collection and transparency at the local level. And so that wraps up this section. And since I'm at time, I want to turn to the next speaker. I want to get some reflections on this data, and I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Carrie Saldo. Carrie has reported for GBH News and other NPR and PBS stations, including regular coverage in our gateway cities. And now I'm going to turn it to Carrie Saldo.
Yvonne, thank you so much. So much fascinating information for our panel to unpack this morning. And, you know, here's where I'd usually warm up the Zoom room a bit with a joke or a comical anecdote. If any of you have jokes about inclusive procurement, please hit me up in the Q&A. I'm very fascinated to hear from all of you about that. And I'll share them at the end of our chat if anyone comes up with them. And if you don't, I'll feel great that I couldn't come up with an interesting joke about that. Let me bring in our panel, who are the folks you really want to hear from today. Bill McAvoy is the Executive Director of the Supplier Diversity Office for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Kareem Kabodia is co-lead of policy and advocacy at BECMA. Natalia Urtube is foundation fellow at Eastern Bank Foundation. And Delana Irvin Parker is the Director of Budget and Supplier Diversity at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. Good morning to all of you. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Now, our chat today, obviously, we're supposed to be discussing ways to promote more inclusive contracting and procurement in our gateway cities, regional economies. Before I ask you to discuss potential solutions, let's look at some of the barriers to set sort of a foundation right now. So let me start with Bill first. Bill, could you talk about what traditionally may have been barriers to cities making their procurement processes more inclusive?
Yes, thank you, Carrie, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today. So some of the barriers that I would envision, being to municipalities, and again, I work at the state level, but some, as pointed out by our prior speakers, are some of the requirements in the municipal procurement law for awarding contracts to the low bidder. At the state level, our procurement law actually is based on the concept of best value, which means you can consider other components. At the municipal level, many of the requirements of the goods and services law, for example, Mass General Law, Chapter 30B, is for low bid. So when you have the flexibility of a best value law, it allows you to introduce criteria such as supplier diversity plans, as opposed to low bid is really based on cost being the primary driving component of that bid being awarded. A couple other barriers that I see are really incumbent barriers, where at the municipal level, whether intentional or not, it's much easier, of course, to be able to just pick up the phone and call for those small purchases, call the local business that you've always dealt with. So again, it's changing that behavior to get folks to look at more diverse and smaller businesses to participate in that. And the last one, that I would consider it would be like lack of resources, including, staffing shortages. You're adding more and more onto the plate of the folks at the municipal level. They're the procurement folks, the purchasing folks, they're, in the business office, and now we're adding additional requirements. And, to be able to provide them with experience, with training, and some knowledge about information that's in the report, and that we're gathering at the local level, on the national level, about the importance of these types of programs, I think would, really help to educate them about the importance of being more inclusive of diverse and small businesses. And also, as pointed out, the need for a disparity study, those are very costly, and that's another resource barrier as well. So.
Kareem, how about for you, with your position at ECMO, what have you seen as barriers or heard from other businesses that you may encounter as barriers?
Yes, thank you for that question. So to start off, it's where the starting line is. Many of you know the story of BECMA and how it was founded in 2015 following the Color of Wealth study. But for those of you that don't know, the study found that while white families had over 247,000 in generational wealth, Latino and Hispanic families was $1,900, and for Black families, it was $8. That isn't an error, it's a singular number, $8. And that is due to the historic factors that are at play here, but also currently the barriers that we have to access, making sure that our mom and pop businesses who are focused on just getting started, running their business in the day-to-day, are able to not only just get by, but also to then have to compete for contracts and bids that they might not fully understand. A lot of the work that we do is around the back office support services, that making sure that we are able to support these business owners, whether that's through accounting, financial assistance, or just technical assistance in general, making sure that we know that we're meeting our community and our constituents where they're at. Black businesses are a very fast growing demographic, but far too often we also do see a gap between what we're hearing from our members regarding them starting their businesses, the struggles that they're going through, but at the same time, then hearing on the other side about there's not enough people applying. And that gap that's what we're here to discuss today, both in the reporting and also in the legislation that we're trying to make sure that we're using to address these matters. It's about making sure that we're all working together. We have a really, really strong opportunity right now, and a time-sensitive opportunity that to make sure that we are making these advancements in this progress, to make sure that we are closing this racial wealth gap.
Thank you, Kareem. And Natalia, let me bring you and then Delana in as well. For your perspective, Natalia, what traditionally have been some barriers that you've seen or heard from businesses to win access to either city or state contracts?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. Some of the barriers that we see across the board, including since the Equitable, navigating the very complicated procurement systems, and this is both on the public and the private sector. I think part of what I'm working on and what Eastern Bank has been focused on for a very long time is how do we ensure that the ecosystem is prepared and ready to take on these contracts. And so we've been supporting businesses through a lot of organizations in the region to ensure that businesses actually understand those processes, that they're able to get certified where necessary, and that they can access the tools and resources they need in order to be able to be competitive for these bids. I think another really important piece that we want to continue to support and emphasize is that doing business with minority-owned business owners, with women-owned business owners, et cetera, is not about charity. It's not about, connecting, these businesses because it's the right thing to do. It's because these businesses are providing quality, high quality, effective services and need to be able to compete in these spaces, but historic barriers have limited that access. And so what we're here to do is to ensure that, one, there's visibility for those businesses and that we can connect businesses to those other companies and make sure that there's enough competition out there so that it's not just one business here and one business there, that it is a comprehensive approach to inclusive procurement.
And Delana, how about for you, just any barriers that you might want to speak to, things you've recognized?
Some of the things I've seen are that, I can speak from a corporate perspective. Some companies haven't had the policies in place that ensure diverse representation in their supply chain. I know at Blue Cross Blue Shield, we have made a concerted effort to put policies and practices in place so that we do have the infrastructure and we don't necessarily have the internal pushback from the internal leaders. The policies are enforceable, and they hold everybody at the company accountable. Our Supplier Diversity program has the support of top leadership, including our CEO, which is Andrew Dreyfus, and he is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that includes supplier diversity. And so I think that more and more you are seeing companies put policy in place just so that we can, ensure that there is an inclusive supply chain at companies.
I want to talk about something that came up in the Empowering Cities report that both Ben and Yvonne were speaking to earlier this morning. Certification from the state's vision of capital management and maintenance, as Bill well knows, and Kareem too, and the women as well, is required to participate in most public construction projects. But as the Empowering Cities report found, white-owned construction businesses are 4 times more likely to have that DCAM certification. Now, before we talk about why so few businesses owned by people of color are, before we talk about why so few businesses owned by people of color are certified, maybe Bill and Kareem, you could speak to why certification is important to begin with. And Kareem, I'll start with you.
Well, as the report indicated, a lot of the public works and construction projects do require certification as the way to get access. So that can be a barrier in and of itself for these businesses. It's not just in terms of just getting certification, it's about knowing exactly how to navigate that process. And then even when you get certification, being able to then maintain compliance. So a lot of businesses that, from what I've heard and from what I've seen, it's more so making sure that we're building that capacity, that we're making sure that we're helping businesses advance from level to level. I know the city of Boston, they have their city contracting fund to help businesses get from that point A to point B. That is a great example of something that is very helpful for businesses that many of our members and constituents have requested. I would say that additionally, a lot of these requirements, the length of these processes, the difficulty that it is to apply, it is a barrier in and of itself. As I noted earlier, many of our businesses, especially following and during the pandemic, which really highlighted the inequities and disparities. It shows that people are just trying to make sure that they're able to keep their business open. They're trying to figure out ways to make sure that they're keeping the lights on. And in order to build and grow their businesses through these contracts, through these bid opportunities, it is important that we are, both the municipalities, the state, and our individual community organizations are meeting people where they're at and working together to make sure that we are figuring out concrete and substantive ways to build these businesses, but then at the same time, making sure that there is oversight and accountability in the process. Delana really hammered in on the importance of the core infrastructure and where we're looking at these ideas and where we're coming from to begin with. It is important that these DEI components are not just an afterthought or consideration, but that they are the forefront of how we're making these decisions and how we're continuing to grow and build.
Recognizing that small businesses, Kareem, to your point, might not have the extra person on their staff to go and delegate, hey, let's make sure that we have our DCAM certification in place, have all of that documentation and paperwork ready and submitted. Is there some sort of partnership you could see happening to help facilitate this process for those businesses? Bill, I see you nodding your head. Let me bring you in.
Thanks. Yes, there actually is some type of partnership. That's a great point, Carrie. And just to clarify, DCAM certification and supplier diversity certification are different processes. The Supplier Diversity Office that I head up has almost 4,000 diverse businesses that we've certified, 1,500 of which are minority business enterprises or MBEs. We've been working very closely with DCAM to try to get more of our certified businesses onto the DCAM certification list. However, I just want to point out that DCAM certification is only required for general contractors on public building projects when the estimated construction cost is going to be under $150,000. Over $150,000. And it's also required for some of the subcontractors that work on the public building projects. But for projects below that amount, diverse and small and all businesses, that is, do not need to be DCAM certified. So we've been working very closely to conduct some outreach sessions with DCAM to try to educate diverse businesses on the opportunities for public building projects and to provide some supportive services. In addition, the Supplier Diversity Office hired a municipal construction coordinator that is now focused on working very closely with municipalities in setting goals and reporting requirements for state-assisted construction projects, and also on coordinating the promotion of those opportunities to SDO and DCAM certified businesses. One classic example is the city of Lawrence, where I was born and raised, in the Gateway City itself. We have a couple Mass School Building Authority projects that are in process, 2 schools that are being built in the city, and we're working with the contract manager, the director for those 2 projects to ensure that there's diversity at both minority, women, and veteran participants in that contract. So this is something that we're taking very seriously and working very closely with DCAM. But again, it's really not for everyone, DCAM certification, but it's definitely an area that we could all improve upon and work to collaborate on with our partners at BECMA, Amplify Latinx, and other organizations.
And I think, Bill, you just articulated something that many small businesses are navigating, right? You've got the certification process through your office. You've got the certification process through DCAM, both very important to unlocking, as Kareem said, the access to these contracts, which not only mean jobs, but mean wealth, right? Reggie not only educated me in the difference between having a job, right? Which is great. It pays the bills and it helps you make ends meet month to month, but that contract is really the game changer, right? It's how people access wealth, and it's hugely different, hugely different. Natalia,
can I just add something? Can I just add something? So I will just emphasize the importance of certification, at least on the corporate side. So at Blue Cross Blue Shield, we require the certification to be included in our supplier diversity program. And I will just say Blue Cross Blue Shield is not unique in requiring the certification. And so other companies require it as well. And so what I have seen, just in engaging with diverse businesses, a lot of them don't have a certification. And sometimes I get the response that they don't necessarily see the value in it. But I can speak to, from a corporate perspective, at Blue Cross Blue Shield, we require it. So there is a return on investment in that. It at least gets you to the table, right? Because without the certification, you can't be included as part of our supplier diversity program. That's not to say you can't do business with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but those policies and practices that I spoke about earlier will not necessarily apply to you.
Natalia, I saw you nodding your head at various points. Wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh on this one before we move on.
Yeah, and I actually just saw somebody in the chat put this in, and I think certification is a complicated requirement, right? We make Black and brown businesses, women-owned businesses, small and local businesses go through incredible hurdles to get certified. Someone who in my past life worked very closely in municipal government, I know on the back end how complicated and capacity heavy it is to actually certify folks. And so I think that there has to be some shift in how we certify people and what those requirements are and at what level, right? Somebody doing multi-million-dollar contracts, you know, maybe certification is more important, but somebody at a $50,000 and below contract, you know, maybe that certification can be altered to be tiered in some way. I know that there are a lot of folks in municipal government doing everything that they can to make it easier for folks to get certified, but I do recognize the incredible barriers to entry those certification requirements. At the same time, you know, it's really hard to find businesses of color that aren't certified, right? Most people are not advertising on their website that they are a Black-owned company or a woman-owned company. And so having those lists is really valuable to companies, to large-scale companies looking for small businesses to partner with, but also for municipalities. You know, there somebody in the chat mentioned how inherently racist it is that we ask women, sorry, not women, Black people, people of color, and as well as women to certify when we're not asking white male-owned firms to do the same thing. So it is a constant battle of complexity that I think in the municipal side, on the private side, we're faced with, because we want to do good business. You know, at the Eastern Bank side on the philanthropy, we want to see these partnerships come to life, of organizations helping businesses go through the certification process, because that is just the state of the world. The state of the world is that you need certain certification in order to be considered. And if we want folks to access those opportunities, we have to learn how to play that game, and we have to make sure folks are prepared and ready, which includes the certification. It's a duality that I think we are constantly faced with as people of color, where yes, we are, you know, as a Latina woman, as an immigrant, we are in fact these characteristics, but beyond that, we bring to life so much more diverse thought and diverse interactions, innovation, etc., that I think is really valuable without having to call it out every time. So it's complex, and so I definitely see the perspectives here on the panel of how complicated it is to require something and also want to do work without those requirements.
Bill, can you speak a bit about whether that's discussed at the state level, that push-pull between how we recognize the, you know, elevating these businesses and making sure that they're on lists so they can access contracts, et cetera, versus, hey, is it fair that the white guys don't have to sign up?
That's a great point, and something we've been battling with on an everyday basis. Actually, when I took over the Supplier Diversity Office, we had a 32-page application. We've narrowed that to 7 pages. We then put everything online. So now it's equivalent of about 5 pages to apply for certification. But we have to battle that, balance that against the whole focus of these programs is integrity based. So all you need is one business to not be owned, to not be controlled, to not be independent by the individual that is the in fact true owner. And it throws the integrity of the whole program out. So what we really tried to do is to simplify the process, simplify the questions. We've also partnered with Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council, Center for Women in Enterprise, the City of Boston, where we accept their certifications on their face. So if you've gone through their certification, why are we going to make you go through our certification? If you've gone through UCP certification, the federal DBE certification, you only have to fill out a 1-page certification form to get onto our certification. So our goal really has been to try to simplify that as much as possible. We also have, when we became an independent agency a year and a half ago, we've grown from 13 staff to now 30 staff. So we have folks that are willing and able to help people with the questions they have. And we've hired additional staff to try to bring our certification timeline down to make sure we're doing it on a more expedited basis. But again, it really is that balance of integrity and robustness of the process to make sure you're getting someone that in fact is legitimately, saying who they are, versus the time frame of and difficulty of filling the form out. But we think we've simplified it and made the process better. Sometimes we see programs where people are not certified. They allow people in that are not certified. I caution people against ever doing that, because again, we've gone through a full investigation to determine that they're independent, they're truly owned by the individual that is applying for the certification.
We heard Yvonne in the presentation discuss this concept of sort of bid splitting, or the potential that state law calls it bid splitting and that potentially it's illegal, or that, excuse me, that it is illegal, but looking at the potential for uncoupling those and breaking those bids into smaller, possibly more accessible components. Would love to open it up to the panel, and I can start with you, Kareem, to hear your thoughts on if you think that those smaller components might be helpful to the range of businesses that you come in contact with.
Yeah, so the bid splitting component, that is part of the work that BECMA is doing with Lawyers for Civil Rights as well as MassINC to lower barriers of both municipalities as well as anchor institutions. So part of that work, as we've discussed here today, and those recommendations regarding accountability, transparency, and also lowering barriers through bid splitting. While there is a lot of concern about the legality of it, as long as people are making sure that it's used as a tool to increase equity and increase diversity, while still managing to report and comply with the larger bid component instead of trying to divert or scurry around any of these compliance reporting requirements, then bid splitting is something that is allowed and permitted. And it is helpful to make sure that we are getting people on track, to make sure that we are building this capacity, and to make sure that for a lot of these businesses, getting that first contract, getting that first opportunity, then creates opportunities to then access more. It builds credibility and it builds access to more opportunities as well.
You're in the pipeline, you're a known entity. Once you've done business once, it's much easier to do it again and again, right? Anyone else want to add to that? Or I might also add to the question, is it time to adjust state law to make that possibility make that a stronger possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that the Eastern Bank Foundation has been supporting this work for quite some time, and we believe that by making it easier to obtain contracts, you're also then helping the municipalities, helping other companies be able to increase their spend, right? If we know that there are more small-sized companies that are available to do contracting work, to get involved, to build those partnerships, that's how they grow. Businesses can't grow overnight. Some do, but those are the unicorns, right? But most businesses are looking for that next opportunity so that they can maybe hire more people and then slowly stabilize to an opportunity to then go and be the primary contractor on a bid, for example. And so allowing bid splitting helps businesses grow, and it helps then build a more robust ecosystem. So it's not just the few companies that are already at that size that can compete for large contracts, and as we've been talking about, build wealth, right? The larger and more stable your company, the better you are at building wealth for yourself and your employees as well.
So Carrie, we don't necessarily have bid splitting at Blue Cross, but what we are exploring is unbundling our large contracts, right? And so carving out specific services and products to diverse businesses. We have also put in policies and language in our contracts with non-diverse vendors to subcontract with diverse businesses. So we are, those are some of the ways we're looking to unbundle our contracts, as well as kind of hold our non-diverse vendors accountable in terms of doing business with diverse businesses.
A number of questions coming in here through the Q&A in the chat. So I'm just going to jump over here and read. Any teeth to be added to current laws, et cetera, so that workers will not face wage theft, not too uncommon among workers of subcontractors, especially for immigrant workers. Any thoughts on that from the panel? All right, maybe, Natalia, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would divert that question to the folks writing the bill, and then Ben Forman, who we'll hear from later, will be a great person to answer that. But I would say, yes, obviously it's really important that not only wage theft is something that's clearly stated in anything that we do when it comes to contracting with businesses, but also that there is a component that we talk about, which is timely payment. And invoices and contracts. A lot of small businesses really depend on swift payment, which oftentimes in government or in large corporations, it takes a little while. And so making sure that payment structures are in place and that they're upheld to pay people for their work quickly allows then businesses to pay their employees in a timely fashion and obtain whatever materials they need for that next project. So I do want to clarify the difference, but it is really critical that companies and municipalities are paying those businesses that they contract with in a timely fashion.
Another question from the chat. Has anyone looked at a mentoring model, bringing more women and BIPOC folks into the system by asking well-established companies? Oops, sorry, my chat function is blown up here and I lost my question. Hang on just a second. Well-established companies to show evidence of mentoring or diverse hiring and apprenticeships or position of leadership so that people have a way into the system if they're newer.
Yes, I will say yes. And Jillian has a great example of that at Blue Cross Blue Shield through the Pay Centers program. But I'm really excited that there are a lot more of these types of partnerships and mentorship opportunities that are popping up. That's some of the work that we're really excited to support because it does help, in fact, build those networks, build those connections to opportunities that are really critical.
I'll just add that we at Blue Cross, we support mentorship and we're very much engaged in mentoring. We partner with our strategic partners like BECMA and the Pace Setters program, as well as the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council, Center for Women in Enterprise to introduce us to MBEs, WBEs, and other diverse businesses so that we can mentor them, so that they can see what our procurement process looks like and what things may be unique to Blue Cross, but also what may extend to other companies as well in terms of what the procurement process looks like. So there are other companies, when I speak to my peers in this space at other companies, they are supporting mentorship as well.
Bill, I see you're muted, jump in.
Yes, we've seen it at the state level too, mentorship, and it is an amazing opportunity really for whether it's diverse business or non-diverse business to play the mentor and to assist diverse businesses. We've seen, as an example, one business that sold a lot of PPE during the pandemic and actually worked closely with another business that did delivery of, had delivery services, logistics, to be able to help deliver that throughout the state. And, that was a great mentor, also a great joint venture type of approach. We also see it at the construction level. Several of the construction companies have worked to develop mentor programs and they have these programs where they bring in small businesses actually and try to develop their partners so that they'll be able to step up and work closer with them on some of the big projects. And one other thing is, in addition to several other resources that we're developing at the state level, we're in the process of rolling out a new system called the Supplier Diversity Hub that is going to provide multiple tools that I can talk about more later. But one of the tools is going to be the opportunity for diverse businesses to connect with state agencies, cities or towns, as well as prime contractors, and the opportunity for folks to be able to mentor and to connect within that system is very important. It's a matchmaking type of system whereby folks can go in and say, I'm looking for someone to help me develop a business plan or this or that or whatever, and they can use that system to be able to do that.
To answer the question, yes, that is a big, that is a major one of our pillars here at BECMA, is making sure that we are both putting people in positions to not only lead, but to be decision makers at the table. We know statistically that Black people are the most likely to hire other Black people or to bring other Black people up in terms of job hiring when they are business owners or even in professional capacity companies. Additionally, from that, a lot of the programs that we do, BECMA doesn't directly provide technical assistance. Instead, we try to use our network as one of the largest organizations in the state that is directly addressing the racial wealth gap, to make sure that we are connecting with our business owners and our business community to not only in our programs and support systems through that back office support that I noted earlier, to make sure that we are providing them with opportunities to then both mentor, to support these businesses and to build that ecosystem and those connections up. That has been one of our most popular things that has made sure that we're connecting people across the state in terms of doing existing businesses and supporting new businesses as well. Additionally, we're working on several programs with our partners around creating more opportunities for bonding support, creating more incubators for construction companies as well, making sure that we are attacking this from every angle that we possibly can.
Kara, can I hop in here just a few
Please.
responses? I mean, one, Wiley and others in the comments about best practices, there are lots of guides out there for municipalities. The Supplier Diversity Office has one, National League of Cities has others. We'll follow up and make sure everybody has those materials. In our report, we really focused on what cities can't do from the best practices playbook because of constraints in Massachusetts law, which are pretty unique to Massachusetts. When we look around the country, there are states that explicitly prohibit cities from using race-conscious policies. California is one of them, unfortunately. But there's lots of flexibility and latitude in other areas so that they can get around that. And one is the shelter market approach, which I think has come up several times in the last bit of the conversation when it comes to wage theft, when it comes to mentorship, joint ventures, mentorship, joint ventures, efforts to get more subcontracts to minority-owned businesses are all good things. But at the end of the day, we want minority-owned businesses to be prime contractors, because often when they're in that secondary position, they're subject to not great things themselves, right? Often they're not paid promptly and taken advantage of in other various ways. So the way to get these businesses to be primes is through shelter market programs. And in Massachusetts, we've had that on the books for 20 years when it comes to goods and services projects. The first time it was ever used is this year. It took 20 years. And that's just goods and services. You can't do it for buildings. You can't do it for public works, which is really where the prime contracting takes place. So I think if we want businesses of color to be part of all that wealth creation, we need to use the shelter market model, which is for municipalities kind of time intensive to set up a separate business process and to make sure that there's awareness and businesses of color are competing amongst themselves on equal grounds. But that's what really gives them the chance to have that opportunity to serve as primes and progress to the point where they can compete without that shelter market protection.
Moving the needle on and some of the legislative changes that either we've talked about here this morning, or if people read through the report, there's some others outlined in it. Is it a matter of grassroots saying, look, this is what we need, let's make this happen? Is it legislators coming to the table and saying, moving proposals? Is it somewhere in the middle? Thoughts on how to move the needle on this?
Yes. So this is really, in my opinion, it does start with us. It starts at the grassroots level, making sure that we are holding our legislators accountable, both by electing legislators that represent our interests, while also making sure that while in office, they are upholding those promises. Here at BECMA, one of the biggest things that we like to focus on, and one of the things that's made me most excited these past few months being in this role and in this job, is seeing the amount of both new business owners, existing business owners across our state, being able to meet with individuals, discuss these issues, both in terms of the opportunities that they have and referring them to other businesses, as well as making sure that we are providing support through our programs and services. At that same time, all of those voices, they are really what fuels our legislative action. We're only as strong as the weakest levels, and making sure that we are using that to build together and to make sure that we are connecting in that way. Our voices are stronger when we're working together, especially in terms of connecting with the legislature and making sure that we are at the lead and making sure that we are a voice for change and creating those impacts and making sure that they are listening.
This is Ivan, and thank you so much, Carrie, for moderating this conversation, which has been fabulous. And I agree with my colleagues. I would say we need more clarity, right? Even the issue of the unbundling of contracts. I've talked to procurement officers in different municipalities who say to me, oh, my lawyers tell me I can't do that. And then I say, yes, you can. And yes, you can. And if you need to get additional support, then contact the Attorney General's office, for example, for guidance. And then they do, and they follow up, and then they get debriefed on the issue. But it shouldn't be a one-off, and it shouldn't be something that a municipality has to do to go out of their way to create this type of opportunity. It would be better if the state affirmatively provided this type of technical support so that it provided really specific guidance. Yes, this is what constitutes impermissible, like evasion of a bid, but everything that you can do is listed here. And so then that way, it doesn't have to be such a one-off, and it doesn't have to be so burdensome on municipalities to create programs that they have to run by their lawyers, run by the Attorney General, and run by state agencies. And so I think just using that as an example of affirmative steps is a good one. And I want to just echo what Ben just said. I absolutely agree that the future here is in creating interventions like sheltered markets. And I gave an example of one in the chat. But to do that, municipalities need the building blocks, and that's the data, and that's a disparity study. And Bill and the panel indicated that that could be, resource intensive for a municipality to do. It makes sense for the state to facilitate that process so that the burden's not on any particular town, especially small towns that want to do the right thing, or low-income towns that are cash-strapped. And so having those resources affirmatively provided by the state for the creation of data collection, disparity studies, that leads to more meaningful interventions like the sheltered program that Ben was talking about, and even more. And so I think that those are, as I put in the chat, kind of like low-hanging fruit that we could be thinking about affirmatively as we move forward. And even if we don't want to get into the whole race-conscious business, which might scare some people, I don't think it should scare you, but if it does, then I just put into the chat a whole bunch of race-neutral things that you could be thinking about. They're not all included in this report, but they're based on some of the analysis that we have done in-house at Lawyers for Civil Rights through our BISGRO initiative, so that if the whole race thing is not something you want to talk about, but you should be, at least you could think about some of these other interventions.
There's a question that's popped up in the chat a few times that's linked to what we're saying, and it's just the price tag on these disparity studies. Why are they so expensive to begin with?
Yeah, I want to push back on that, Carrie. I mean, what is expensive, right? If you look at even if it costs $1 million to do a disparity study, the city of Worcester's budget is $700 million, right? And so that's less than 0.1% of 1%, and they last for 5 or 6 years. So now you're talking about an infinitesimal sort of fraction of the city's budget. So I don't think we should let costs be an excuse. I think it's more a political will problem. But I think the more legitimate response is, why bother to do one if we can't use this, even with a disparity in things like public works construction? So, we're lowering the value proposition for cities. The state's got to provide the leadership to encourage cities to do them and make sure that if they have one in hand, it's worth everything that it would be worth in another state. So I think that we need to do that, but also there's no question that DCAM's provided leadership by having a disparity study that all municipalities can access for building construction. And we could do the same thing, I think, with other agencies. And other states, they've had disparity studies that are multiple cities, multiple regional agencies. There's lots of opportunity to produce these more efficiently so that they have as much impact as possible.
We have just a few minutes left. This conversation has flown this morning, but I do want to give each of the panelists an opportunity. Just any final thoughts that you'd like to share that are lingering in your mind, additional things you'd like to leave people to think about as action items, whatever's top of mind for you right now. And why don't I start with you, Natalia?
So first of all, I just want to say that the foundation is really excited to take on inclusive procurement and partner with all the folks here on the call in some way, shape, or another to ensure that this is a pathway to building wealth for small businesses throughout the ecosystem, particularly in the gateway cities. Because if we don't do this now, we're just going to fall further behind. We know that access to capital, access to contracts, access to opportunities is the pathway to building wealth for communities of color and for women-owned businesses. I think it's really imperative that I say too that these partnerships are critical, right? Building networks for businesses is the way in which a lot of these small businesses are able to even become aware about these opportunities. And the more that we can collaborate, the more that we can support that collaboration, I think the better off we'll be for businesses. And we will see that. I'm very optimistic. I always have been. I try to stay optimistic even when we see these abysmal numbers of contracting and spend. I see the work happening behind the scenes, and I know that people are really trying to move it forward. And I think this is a critical moment in time. And I remain optimistic that these incredible thinkers on this panel will be, able to move these numbers forward.
Kareem, how about for you? Final thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Carrie. Thank you everyone today for joining us. I think the biggest thing that we have to do is consider our next steps and consider how we can continue opening these communication lines, continue this dialogue. Natalia was right. This is, we do have some big opportunities here, but they are time sensitive. We have to make sure that we're getting on this, working together to build off of this momentum that we have here going. And especially, I'd like to just say to our members, especially our people of color on the call, to make sure that you are hearing these words and hearing and knowing that there are people out there supporting you, that there are organizations that are doing this work to make sure that you do have the opportunities that you need to not only survive, but to thrive. And I would encourage everyone on this call to make sure that they are connecting with all of the partner organizations here to continue working together to address these issues.
Great, thank you. Delana, any final thoughts from you?
Yes, I would just kind of repeat what I said earlier about the importance of certification for all the diverse businesses in the audience. To Natalia's point, that is one of the ways you're going to be able to access contracts, particularly at Blue Cross. And like I said, Blue Cross is not unique from a company perspective, from a corporation perspective, in requiring the certification. So I would encourage you to engage with Bill, who's actually on the panel, and the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council, the Center for Women in Enterprise. They're also certifying agencies as well. So I just can't emphasize that enough, how key the certification is.
Thank you. And Bill.
Thank you. And thank you everyone, for inviting me today. And this has been an amazing panel. This is a great opportunity for all of us to collaborate and to talk about this. We have to keep these conversations going. This is the opportunity for all of us to really look at ways to remove barriers, to provide resources to diverse and small businesses, and to evaluate our internal processes to make sure that we're being inclusive of diverse and small businesses. I don't think that the shelter market program is the only way. I do personally think that there are ways that cities and towns, through small purchases, can find opportunities for diverse businesses to be included in their purchasing. I just want to let everyone know the Supplier Diversity has a ton of tools. We have a municipal supplier diversity playbook. We've developed a heat map we're going to be rolling out later on this summer that will show the state of Massachusetts. You can drill in by city or town or neighborhood or whatever zip code to see where diverse businesses are located in your region. So if you're doing those small purchases, you can pick out the ones that are minority, women, veteran, et cetera, if you're looking to expand and get more businesses you're doing business with. And lastly, I just want to talk about our Supplier Diversity Hub in closing. It's a data tool, but it also has matchmaking components, tracking, compliance, reporting, all these different components in it that can be used by cities, towns. All of our services are free. The most important thing about the hub I want to make my point to today, it's in the report, it says that the Commonwealth should fund grants for data collection. This Supplier Diversity Hub is a game changer. Once rolled out to municipalities, you'll be able to upload a spreadsheet with all of your spending, all of your vendor spending into the hub. It will provide the city or town the opportunity to be able to get back from that, which of those businesses are diverse or small businesses. So you'll be able to set your baseline, determine your baseline of how you're doing as a city or town with your spending. You'll be able to track it on a monthly, quarterly, however basis you want to be able to use. Again, it's a free tool made available right once we roll it out in the next couple of months for all cities and towns to be able to do those data analytics themselves. Put the information in about all of your spending, and you'll find out which one's minority, which one's veteran, which one's women-owned businesses, et cetera. We have a ton of other tools. I don't want to take up more time, but please contact me if you have any questions or if you'd like to share or learn more about some of our resources.
So much wonderful information, the panel. We could have kept going, but I do have to end it here. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank the audience who submitted their questions via the chat and the Q&A function. And now I'm going to hand things off to Andre LaRue, who is the director of MassINC's Gateway Hubs project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a great panel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andre LaRue, and I run the Gateway Hubs program here at MassINC. Our program is focused on implementing policies, local and state policies, based on our research on regional mobility, equitable development, and shared leadership in our gateway cities. Well, we're in that special month when so many major pieces of legislation get passed. But legislative Christmas is even more special than regular Christmas, since it only comes around every 2 years. But these bills always include an economic development package, which by tradition and necessity is the last bill passed, oftentimes on July 31st, and which has a huge impact on our gateway cities. This year, the Joint Committee on Economic Development did an incredible job, including a number of our key priorities in the bill that they put together. We can attribute much of that to the fact that gateway cities legislators are very well represented on that committee, including the Senate chair, who is Senator Eric Lesser. He represents communities including Springfield and Chicopee. Senator Lesser is also the co-chair of the Gateway Cities Caucus, and we're lucky to have him with us today. So let's welcome the senator to give us his perspective and insight about what's in play. Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you so much, Andre. It's good to see so many familiar faces. I do want to give a shout out to Carrie Saldo, Western Mass's own, who did a great job moderating that, and good to see Kareem as well, who I work closely with in Congressman Neal's office, and so many other friends on the call. And Andre, you and I, this is like our 4th or 5th Zoom in the last week or 2 weeks. Nobody's counting, but I just want to thank you and MassINC for the incredible partnership that you offer the legislature, and in particular, the Economic Development Committee and the Gateway Cities Caucus that we do a lot of work on together. Without MassINC, we'd be lost, frankly, because you provide so much of the kind of intellectual firepower, the research support, the big picture thinking that we really need. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Eric Lesser, I'm a state senator from Western Mass. I represent 2 gateway cities, Springfield and Chicopee, as well as small towns and suburbs in the greater Springfield area. I also chair our committee in the Senate on economic development and emerging technologies. I also chair our manufacturing caucus, as well as our Gateway Cities Caucus, 2 caucuses that are relevant to the conversation today. And I just want to in particular talk about the elements of the economic development bill that are focused on an inclusive economy. We've worked closely with my co-chair in the Gateway Cities Caucus, Antonio Cabral of New Bedford, and my co-chair in the Economic Development Committee, Jerry Paracella of Beverly, on an entire package of proposals around inclusive economic growth. They've been included in the House package. We are going to add hopefully even more in the Senate package, and have a really hopefully strong and quick conference committee because it all has to get wrapped up by July 31, which is why we're all talking today. And I just want to highlight a couple of things that we've already done. The Economic Development Committee at the height of COVID put out an economic rescue package over $600 million that was specifically targeted to our smallest businesses. We kind of got this trend started, which we've now seen with states across the country, but we wrote into that legislation that the first rounds of funding had to go to minority-owned businesses and immigrant-owned businesses in our lowest income and highest need zip codes. We were frankly testing, writing into the law itself rather than relying on the kind of goodwill of administrators and certainly well-meaning grant overseers, but actually making a legal requirement that those groups get priority. And it worked very well. The first two tranches of that economic aid package that we worked closely with the Baker administration on did go almost entirely to minority-owned and immigrant-owned businesses, and it has helped keep hundreds of small businesses afloat. And we need to do a lot more around contracting and procurement. We included in the Senate last session a language modeled off of what's called the Massport model, which is an affirmative marketing and an affirmative procurement strategy that's been one of the most successful in the country. We're hoping to take that language and incorporate it statewide. And an issue I'm particularly passionate about is our highest growth sectors in Massachusetts: venture capital, life sciences, high tech, that engine our economy here in Massachusetts and are where a large portion of the new jobs are being created. We're very lucky to have those industries here, to have that innovation taking place here in Massachusetts. But I think we all know that that sector, as exciting as it is and as much as it's powering, is not diverse in really any respect. It's not diverse geographically, it's not diverse racially, it's not diverse along gender lines. And so we have a proposal in the Senate that we're going to be pushing to help do seed venture funding to, in particular, minority and women-owned high growth startup businesses that are basing themselves in Massachusetts. Because the idea here is that we're giving pathways in for all types of different businesses, companies, workers to help build wealth and help build opportunity. So I'm happy to take questions, but I know you have a very tight program. I was told only a few minutes. I probably already went over, but I do want to give homework to everybody because we are in the tight March here to the July 31 session deadline. The House has released its draft version of the Ways and Means version of its economic development bill. It is a monster package. It includes the $1 billion in tax relief. It includes the economic development measures that we've been talking about. It includes ARPA and supplemental budget spending on a large scale. And then we are going to be doing it very quickly after the House is done. All of this needs to be finished and reconciled by July 31. So if you have items that are important to you, if you have issues or specifics that you would like to see reflected in those packages, reach out to your senators, to your representatives now, like literally today, because it's moving very fast. And certainly you can reach out to me. We can try to steer you in the right direction, but the ink is not even dry on the House Ways and Means version. And it's going to be moving through the House this week. The Senate is going to be taking it up very soon after that, and then it all has to get reconciled and signed by the governor before July 31. Well, he has a little bit more time to sign it, but we have to send it to him no later than July 31. And I think we are in a really unique moment here. The scale of the economic development bill, the size of it is really unprecedented. The ability to utilize ARPA and supplemental budget funding is on a scale that we have never really seen before. So we've got real opportunity here to move the needle. And I think we have a growing consensus in the legislature and with the governor that this is an important priority, that inclusive growth and inclusive economic development strategies are something we have to put at the absolute top of the list of our economic plans for our state. So thank you, Andre, and yeah, happy to take questions or defer to you on what's next.
Yeah, well, Senator, I do have one quick question, which is your committee had included your language around inclusive entrepreneurship and economic justice bill into the Economic Development Committee's version. That was not included in the House Ways and Means version that was just released. And so what can we do to support you to help get that language into the Senate version?
Yeah, so our hope is that we'll include that in the Senate version. So the most important thing to do is certainly to reach out to your individual local senators. That's always one of the first steps and is a very important piece. Also communicating and reaching out to Senate leadership, including the Senate president and the Ways and Means chair, also letting them know that it's a priority for your communities and explaining why, right? Like why these policies make a real difference, what they're doing on the ground for people is really important. But it's a big priority of the Senate, and we're hopeful that we'll have it included in the Senate version, and also very importantly that we make it through the conference negotiation, which is going to be very quick this year.
And Senator, if there were, you mentioned the seed funding for high growth firms. If there are things like that you'd like us to share with participants and other folks in our Gateway Cities network, you can forward those along to us and we'll send those out.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, MassINC, you helped us write it. So MassINC has been, really incredible partners every step of the way on this. And I do want to thank BECMA as well, that worked very closely with us on drafting that over really several years. And, really want to thank everyone on this call for making this a priority. And we're very close. We're very close to getting some very big things done in this space.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator. We are running out of time, but we do have someone else that we'd like to give a few minutes to. Gateway Cities can't do this work alone, and we're really grateful for the Massachusetts Municipal Association's partnership and leadership. So I'd like to turn it over to Dave Kaufman, the MMA's legislative director, to help us guide us with his perspective.
Thank you so much, Andre, and really thank you so much for everyone for being here and taking time. I will be as quick as possible. I know it's been really a jam-packed discussion so far, and really, as Senator Lester mentioned, really pleased about the ongoing work. I think he had a really strong proposal from the House Ways and Means version of the Economic Development Bill yesterday. I know that'll be fine-tuned in the coming days, and the Senate has it's worked together to really improve that as well, to have a strong package before the 31st. So a lot of great work. And again, it really takes all of us here as part of this call to really make that land somewhere incredibly thoughtful and inclusive towards what we're looking for in the economy. So quickly, I'm Dave Kaufman. I'm the legislative director at the Massachusetts Municipal Association, which represents the Commonwealth's 351 cities and towns on Beacon and Capitol Hill. And I'm, again, so pleased to be here. But really more so to be part of this incredible discussion and conversation on how to empower equitable growth across the Commonwealth. One thing that's vividly clear to me is look no further past our municipalities, our cities, our gateway cities, towns of all sizes, frankly. Municipal leadership, we know, is where the rubber hits the road, sometimes literally, but our mayors, managers, administrators, and all local officials really demonstrate the necessary leadership as well as dedication each and every day to be deliberate, to be intentional, to really maximize the impact of their work in terms of accelerating inclusion. But as has been highlighted today, municipalities need to be empowered in this work and really need the direct support to really enable to meet these goals and to really move this forward here. And only then can we really assist in dismantling these barriers to inclusion and catalyzing the equitable growth that's needed. So again, what's necessary? It's activating the intentionality of public investments to assist in closing these racial wealth gaps, investing in, of course, small businesses, absolutely essential to local and regional economic development in this work, especially communities and businesses of color and businesses, women-owned businesses as well. Of course, to empower municipalities to be able to advance this inclusion in its procurement process, and just as important, to fund this work at the local level with additional state support. Absolutely essential. So with that, I just really want to thank Maeve, thank Andre, of course, Ben Forman, the entire MassINC team for not just putting this together, but really your leadership in this work and convening and propelling this integral conversation today, as well as in the days and weeks ahead. Of course, Senator Lester, for your constant work and leadership in terms of gateway cities is fantastic. And of course, deep gratitude to BECMA, to LCR, and all the partners for their essential work on this across the Commonwealth. So we are so proud at the MMA to be part of this and be part of propelling this work forward. So thank you all.
Thanks, Dave. We really look forward to continuing to work with the MMA. You guys are such an important presence on Beacon Hill. Also want to thank you one more time, Senator Lesser, and just say that that's really all we have for you with this program today. So I want to thank all of you for participating. Thanks once again to our sponsors who made today's event possible. We appreciate everyone who joined us and for your dedication to the Gateway Cities. Our next event, the 10th Annual Gateway Cities Innovation Awards, will be held in November, and we hope to see you then. We'll send out details later. Please have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.